Today I'm going to show you how I made this ribbed cat beanie. It has this beautiful knit look pattern, and the structure is very simple. It's made from a rectangle piece, so it's very easy to do, and there's no need to shape the ears, which is what a lot of people struggle with. So let's get started. So first, make a panel like this, and this panel is made by working rows back and forth like this. I don't have the yarn label, but that's okay because you can use a different weight, meaning a different thickness, because you're going to be focusing on the measurement and not the stitch number or row count. And for this yarn, I used a 7mm crochet hook. So first, I made a slip knot. Grab this through this loop. Insert hook. And then make a chain that is this length. This is about 15 inches. So a 15-inch chain, and then begin to work row 1, chain 1 to turn. In the second chain from the hook, you can work in this, but it's going to create a different edge than this. I like my edge like that, so I turned and worked into the back loop. In that back loop, work a yarn over slip stitch. To work in yarn over slip stitch, yarn over, insert hook in that back loop, yarn over, pull this yarn up through that back loop, and then pull the same loop through the other two. And when you do that, pinch this part so this loop doesn't get pulled. That's the first stitch done. Place a stitch marker in this very first stitch. And then continue working 1 yarn over slip stitch in the back loop of each stitch. So yarn over, insert in the next back loop, yarn over, pull it through the back loop, pinch here, and then pull it through the other two loops. Second stitch, continue doing this, yarn over, insert in back loop, yarn over, pull it through, pull first one through the other two. Continue doing this to the end of the row. So that's 1 yarn over slip stitch in the back loop of each chain, including the very last one. So that's row 1. Next, we work row 2. At the beginning of every row, you chain 1 and turn. Row 2 will be the repeat row, so try to remember the pattern. In the very first stitch, work a yarn over slip stitch, but in both loops. Because if you work in both loops for the stitches on the very edge, it'll look tighter like this. it's more sturdy. Use a second stitch marker to mark the first stitch on this side. So that's the first stitch. From the second stitch, only work in the back loop of each stitch. So one yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only of each stitch. So only the first stitch, both loops. From the second one yarn over slip stitch in the back loop all the way to the very last stitch, and the very last stitch work in both loops as well. The last stitch you're going to work in this marked stitch, but just like the first one, the very last stitch you need to work in both loops. And then from here you just repeat row 2, which is chain 1. So just like row 2, the very first stitch work a yarn over slip stitch, but in both loops. And then from the second one yarn over slip stitch in the back loop of each stitch. Work that all the way to the end of the row. And then the last stitch, again, work in both loops. A yarn over slip stitch. So that is the pattern for every row. Keep repeating that row to make a rectangle like this. So continue working like that until your rows, this edge is half of your head circumference, and that is because the two edges together will make up your whole head circumference. And I decided to stop at this row. Now you can use 2 stitch markers to pin the corners together. You can also use other things like clips to do it. Then put this on your head and make sure it fits snug. For adult size, it should be around 11 inches. Now that I've decided to stop working my rows, I'll fasten off. So chain 1, pull yarn through, and leave a long tail to sew these edges together. Leave about 1 meter. Now I'll join the edges together. By the way, you can do this from either side. So I join them stitch to stitch, inserting in both loops of both edges. Pull the yarn through and chain 1. Then go into the next stitch, both loops, next stitch on the other side, both loops, pull yarn up and slip stitch. Then continue doing that to the end of the row. As you get close to the corner, it's harder to insert in the stitches, which is normal. I have 2 stitches left around this corner, so I work them together. Then chain 1, pull yarn through to fasten off. Now attach the yarn on the other side and join these edges together. To attach the yarn, make a slip knot. Insert in both loops of the first stitches. Pull this loop through, chain 1, And then start from the second stitch, do the same thing as the other side, insert in both loops of both edges, making sure the stitches match, and make a slip stitch in each of them. After that, you can fasten off any ends you have, and then flip this over. This cat beanie is done.